I love this comment because it's really funny, right? Because right now there are some quite literal examples of this, right? So think of, I will vote for Donald Trump. Think of that, right? Look at the people in those videos, right? Look at the people in those videos. You can tell that these Cubans basically are like, oh, no, I'm white though. And the way that they talk about Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, like everyone, right? They talk about them like they're white, right? And you could tell by the arrogance that they presented in those videos that they really thought that if they bought into racism, they would be considered white. You know what's really actually funny about this question? I know that you asked this question thinking that it was a stupid thing, right? Like you personally, with your understanding of what race is in this country, think that I'm kind of crazy for saying that people aspire to be white. But quite literally, whiteness as a categorization has only expanded in this country because there are people in this country who believe that we need the category of white in order to maintain a certain class of dominant people who have light skin in this country, right? People, I guess, don't really understand that we used to definitely live in a time where rights were only given to free white people, right? So there were a whole group of people in this country who are now considered to be white that were not considered white when they first got here. And we see kind of the trappings of that with stuff like Cubans for Trump, right? Because you have these people who believe that if they buy into anti-blackness and racism and xenophobia and and act just like the white man, they will be rewarded whiteness. And being rewarded whiteness in this country does matter because and the funny thing about this is we're going to start to see people trying to make this more of a thing. This is essentially a white ethno state, right? Historically, we live in a country, right, that has a history of wanting to only empower white men, right? And everyone else who is not a white man is supposed to service white men. And what we're seeing right now in this administration is that there are people who very much want to make America great again. And by that, they mean make America a white ethno state again, right? You're going to see this stuff become more obvious because, in our neoliberalism, a lot of people wanted to buy into the idea that racism was over, that race relations have improved so much that we have no reason to even have some of these conversations. But no, the core of a lot of what we're seeing right now happening with Donald Trump is that white racists in this country know that whiteness as a construction needs to be protected so that they can maintain power. They can't maintain power with a drop in the birth rate, right? So if they have less white children in this country and naturally people of color end up dominating the country, there are white people who are very afraid that their white privilege is not going to be, getting them the return that they really wanted. And what's really interesting about this too, right? We just had Juneteenth. Lincoln didn't free the slaves because he cared about black people. Lincoln said very famously that he actually never believed that white people and black people should ever have the same amount of power. They gave slaves freedom to punish white men, right? And when we talk about things like affirmative action and DEI, the reason why people wanted to take some of that stuff away is because they felt, sorry, my phone cut off, but basically white people right now are crashing out because they feel like white supremacy isn't quite cashing the checks in a way that it used to, right? So really what happened is people of color were given the opportunity to succeed. And there's a lot of white people who are like, oh, they weren't supposed to actually be able to, right? And and it's funny because the reason you say shit like this is because they've worked really hard to make stuff like this invisible, essentially, to make it so that you don't even understand that that's what's happening, right? Like the Lashify CEO is very clearly someone who is trying to fit in with white people, right? And it doesn't matter if someone is actually white. They aspire to whiteness, which means that they often need to push down people of color in order to pander essentially to this white racism that frankly is very powerful in this country because it is such a central part of this country, right? So yes, people aspire to be white. It is a real thing that is observable, right? They aspire to have the same attitude and access as a white person. And then when you see stuff like, the Cubans being deported right now, who voted for Trump, like they end up in this position where like, oh fuck, right? Like, oh, you really meant it. Like there isn't an exception being made for me. And the trick is they give you just a little bit to think that you are actually having the exception being made for you, right? But then they pull it out from under you, right? A lot of people who voted for Trump, who are also part of demographics that are getting deported right now, genuinely thought that if they bought into the racism, if they supported the white supremacy, it wouldn't happen to them, right? They really did feel that. And if you don't believe me, just like, I don't know, look it up, man. It's all over this platform, right? Yes, there are people who aspire to be white and then do shit like engage in racism in order to do it, right?